It's the film that all the nerd world is talking about, and in this week's episode of The Byword, we throw our respective capes and cowls into the ring. That's right, we're giving a full review of Matt Reeves' The Batman. The Byword begins now. Welcome to another episode of the Nerd Byword podcast, the only nerd podcast that, apparently like Oswald Cobblepot, can correct your Spanish grammatical errors. He's Dave, I'm Kris, and together we form the dynamic duo of nerds that today will be bringing you our thoughts on and reaction to the latest cinematic spectacle in the world of comic book films, The Batman. But first, it's time for... Dave, hello there.
Yeah, well, it seems like, the new Kenobi trailer. Wait, we're not doing the Batman voice thing? Crap, man, I wish somebody would have told me. So it turns out that the first teaser trailer for the Disney Plus limited series, Obi-Wan Kenobi, just released. And lo and behold, this sucker actually got me hyped, and I'm not really quite sure what's going on. Is it that Ewan McGregor was the absolute best part of the prequel movies? Is it that John Williams' scores from the prequels still rocked, even though the movies themselves were questionable at best? I'm really not sure, but I'm very, very excited to revisit Ewan McGregor's version of Obi-Wan Kenobi. And I'm just unreasonably excited for this limited series, considering how little esteem I have for the prequel movies. There's also, just generally the sense that Ewan McGregor in particular could have done so much more with the role of Obi-Wan Kenobi if he would have gotten better writing. And based on what we've seen from something like The Mandalorian, some of these Disney Plus series are obviously getting some really good writing and directing going. So there's an excitement there. I'm also really interested to see how far they push some of the Tatooine stuff. Now, I know through several, quote unquote leaks, that the whole series is not going to be taking place on Tatooine, which, is interesting too, thinking that, Kenobi might have left for a little while. But at the same time, I'm very interested in, the Lars family and their raising of Luke and how much we get to see of young Luke and how he is characterized at this point in his life. And then, of course, there's the big one that they didn't even really touch on in the trailer, which is, of course, that we get to see Darth Vader again, and that Hayden Christensen has returned to play him. I would say there's probably a very good chance we're going to get some flashbacks to before his transformation. Otherwise, it makes very little sense to bring him back. And then I'm very interested in those flashbacks. How are they going to reconcile the really crappy writing of the prequels with something that tries to be, a little better? How are they going to hit that characterization? Are they going to lean into, more the Clone Wars characterization of Anakin? Or what exactly are they going to do with these scenes? There are a lot of questions here. All I know for sure is that visually, so far, it looks gorgeous. It definitely has sort of a big screen Star Wars vibe going on. It's expansive. It's gorgeous. Having John Williams back to do the score, even though the man is like 90 years old at this point, and just seeing Ewan McGregor back in this role, I don't know, man. Is it nostalgia, Kris? Am I really falling victim to nostalgia for the prequels of all things? Why am I so excited about this thing, man?
It's the Inquisitorial Squad, because that looks awesome. I know the High Inquisitor, I believe is his name, the guy with the pale face and then the markings. But the unnamed character that is played by a black woman, I'm not even sure of her name. Like, she is absolutely captivating to me. Her aura is just mesmerizing. So that's one of the primary things that's bringing me back. My initial reaction is like that viral TikTok where it's like, that's effing Obi-Wan Kenobi. Like, it's so it's so awesome. Like, yeah. And I think for me, what's bringing me back to this is kind of the revitalization of Star Wars through these Disney Plus series. Even with the sequel trilogies, we have our lumps to throw in about those. But as a Star Wars fan, I've really felt rejuvenated with these Disney Plus series, and they've had a couple of dips, but for the most part, I'll take them. So one thing that keeps me coming back to like that prequel era, and like it's like so much untapped potential, I feel, particularly with something like Hayden Christensen, um with Ewan McGregor, is like there's so much quality talent there, and they just weren't given any ingredients. We talked about this, with our fixing of the prequel episodes. But it'll be interesting to see like what we can do now, because, and I think that's probably the biggest thing that's got me excited coming back, is all that untapped potential that was just left on the shelf there.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing. I always felt like the chemistry between Christensen and Kenobi was there, but then in Attack of the Clones they were separated for most of the movie. In Revenge of the Sith they're separated for huge chunks of the movie, except for the opening action sequence. I feel like we very very rarely had those moments. Like we were constantly being told that they had this super like deep connection and friendship and everything, but we never actually saw it. And if anything else, I hope that we get some flashback scenes that kind of elucidate that relationship a little bit, and make us feel what Kenobi feels when he looks at his former friend and trainee having fallen so far. I mean, I think that would be a missing piece of the puzzle that we desperately need in Star Wars. But yeah, man, I'm just excited about this, and I'm ready to rock. I'm ready to watch this thing.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, Kris. Once again, you have to be the downer. So we go from excitement to what the crap.
Let's look at it this way. It's like we've learned our lesson. So it came out that Zoe Kravitz was turned down for a role in Christopher Nolan's film The Dark Knight Rises in 2012, and to put this, there's no real great way to put this, for being too urban. Um, and so a lot of people were speculating that it was indeed for the role of Catwoman, but she took to Instagram stories to dispel that, um, saying, quote, I wanted to audition for a small part in the film. I was told, I do not know who said this, but this is how it was worded to me, that they were not going, quote, urban on the part. This is something that I heard a lot 10 years ago. It was a very different time, end quote. So she goes on to say that like this is not a direct shot at Christopher Nolan or anybody particularly that was involved, and that we've come a long way. But it's just crazy to think there was so much that went wrong with that movie. And when you kind of take like the bird's eye view, the macro view of this, with someone like Christopher Nolan, who has been built up as this like auteur cinematic genius or what have you, and a lot of his films I do enjoy. Inception is one of my all-time favorites. But when you kind of sit back and think at the greater picture of this, in with someone like Nolan, he kind of lives in that echo chamber, and he's probably surrounded by a lot of affirmation. And when you look at the majority of his cast, with the exception of John David Washington in Tenet, it is a majority, if not exclusively, a white cast. And so I just think that that's like a problem of not diversifying the people that are around you, and just surrounding yourself with people that just kind of sign off on everything that you say, and not widening your own horizons enough. And I think that is an apt criticism of people like Christopher Nolan. And I'm glad to see that there is a happy ending to this, and we've got, we'll talk about this more in our review of the film. But what we could have had with that film, to be honest, that was a whole mess, that movie. You know Casting white actors for Bane, casting a white actor for Talia al Ghul, for Ra's al Ghul, like it's incredibly problematic when you look back at it. Of course, it was 10 years ago, and you'd like to think that we would come stronger now. But yeah, so maybe it's a blessing in disguise that Zoe was able to kind of dodge this bullet per se, and then kind of get, her time in the sun with this film.
Yeah, it strikes me that Nolan is a director who orders copious amounts of crackers with his soup, if you get my meaning. I'm really unsure, I don't think that's necessarily, I don't know if it's deliberate on his part, if it's a subconscious thing, but, you're right. Even like just kind of thinking back through some of his movies, The Prestige, for example, which I thought was very well done. Most of the Batman movies were good, but I'm struggling to think of many people of color. There was like that one mob boss in The Dark Knight, I think, and of course there was
Michael Jai
Morgan
White.
Freeman.
Yeah, Michael Jai White.
Yeah, and then that's right, and then there was
Morgan Freeman.
Morgan Freeman.
But I mean, it's Morgan Freeman. I mean, like,
yeah, I mean, So, until Tenet, it was very, very much, white casts almost exclusively in his movies. And it is probably a little bit of the George Lucas syndrome, like you have achieved a certain level of success, and then you are surrounded by yes men and yes women who basically don't question any of your decisions. And it would be good for somebody to say, have you thought about maybe a person of color? Have you read a comic book? Talia al Ghul isn't white. These are, I think, sincere issues that we see coming out of Hollywood. Nolan seems, in a lot of ways, a little tone deaf with some of his statements that he's made over the last couple of years. It feels a little bit like he's starting to believe his own hype.
Yeah.
And although he makes always interesting movies, even if they don't work. I'm pointing at Interstellar, for example, which I thought was a very, very, very fun little sci-fi mood piece. And at the same time, I think the finale, because love transcends time and space, was a little weird and hokey. The man makes interesting movies. That is absolutely undeniable. And he does experiment in some respects with the form. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But that's the point, I think. Sometimes the things he does don't work, and so he should definitely make sure he surrounds himself with people that are willing to question him, even if that's a casting agent that's like, are you really sure that this role has to be somebody that's not a person of color? How does that even influence this character? That seems like a weird situation. Like everybody needs somebody standing on the sidelines, yelling, "Remember, thou art mortal." And I think in some cases with these Hollywood directors, they need it especially.
Yeah. Carbon copy that and send it to Ridley Scott as well.
You're not kidding, man. I mean, some of the tone deaf stuff these people are saying lately, Martin Scorsese too. Yeah. Just because more people watch a superhero movie than your little crime drama doesn't mean necessarily that there's some kind of like blind spot in society and they just don't recognize art anymore. Maybe your little crime movie just wasn't that interesting. And I'm one of the first people to say I don't need boom boom explosions and action scenes nonstop. Something we can talk about more in our review of The Batman. But you do have to do something to captivate your audience. I mean, nobody's going to flock to your movie just because your name is Ridley Scott or Martin Scorsese. Not these days.
Yeah, I still want my money back for The Irishman, and
I refuse to watch it.
Oh my god, yeah, yeah. It is interesting to note that with John David Washington being the lead of Tenet, you think maybe he's turned a corner, but then you see the cast so far of his upcoming film Oppenheimer, and it looks like a Fox News like talent scout thing. So it's not great, Bob.
Here's our cast for the movie. We got Tucker Carlson as Oppenheimer. We got Laura Ingraham as his love interest. That's really creepy. Yeah. I think on that note, maybe it's time for us to move on, Chris.
All right, be sure to stick around after this, our first break. We're coming at you with our review, likes, dislikes, and the whole shebang with Matt Reeves The Batman. All right, it's here. All 2 hours and 55 minutes of it. We are here to discuss The Batman. Our likes, our dislikes, everything in between. as is customary with our film reviews. Um, we have 3 likes and 3 dislikes apiece, even if, not to put the cart before the horse, you have to really scrape the bottom for the ladder, at least in my perspective. But Dave will go likes first. And this is the first thing I noticed about the film, and is the first thing that we said after we both watched it. What is your first like?
I think one of the things that has happened with Batman is that certain interpretations of the character have sort of started superseding sort of the origin point of the character and the influences that were very clear sort of in the early goings of the character. So one of the things we see is like, here's Batman who can stand up to alien invasions. Here's Batman who, tussles with Darkseid, blah, 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 yada, 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 which has never been really the best starting point for a Batman story in my book. Batman, in a lot of ways, is deeply influenced by like the film noir movement in particular, I think. And everybody's sort of favorite interpretation of Batman, and yes, I say everybody, even though there is always somebody who disagrees, is definitely this grounded sort of detective story. I mean, if you take Batman and you swap out the cape and cowl for like a fedora and a raincoat, you can pretty easily get a sense for, the kind of story that Batman feels really at home in. And this is really, in a lot of ways, the first time that a movie has leaned into the film noir sort of influences that are very, very clear in some of the best Batman stories. Many of the best Batman stories are mysteries in some way, and he's trying to, figure something out, and he's investigating. And although there are action sequences, there are also a lot of scenes that could come straight out of something like the Maltese Falcon, a good Humphrey Bogart noir movie where he's just kind of moving from scene to scene and talking to different people. And, the plot keeps thickening and he's trying to like put the pieces together. That is very much in the DNA of Batman. And I am so pleased that we're starting to see that now in a big screen adaptation. It's so odd to me that Batman was so clearly influenced by what is essentially a movement within movie making. Yet when they started making movies about Batman, even going back to like the very first, serial that they made of him, they never really leaned into the noir elements. And here we are, and this is something that Matt Reeves absolutely got right. I mean, within the first few minutes, we have voiceover narration. There is a very sort of slow, deliberate pacing. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not boring or something, and I wouldn't say that it's slow as a storytelling thing, but it is not racing from action set piece to action set piece necessarily. It takes its time. It realizes that there is tension and drama in inner character sort of interactions, and not just, punch, blow something up. There is drama in those interactions as well, and it definitely milks the drama out of those interactions. It's a very, very clearly a detective plot with sort of serial killer, and Batman's trying to catch him. Very clearly influenced by something like The Long Halloween or Dark Victory. Both of those are Jeff Lowe pieces from before he lost his mind. And those are very, very good influences. Even those stories, strong voiceover element. There's a killer on the loose that has a particular pattern. Batman is trying to catch the person. This is sort of the DNA of the character. And seeing what is an interpretation on the big screen of some of the best elements of Batman and some of the things that make him so much more interesting than, the average, superhero, the guy who doesn't have powers, the guy who uses his mind as well as his brawn. These things have been sorely lacking in big screen adaptations of Batman. So just seeing these film noir elements, seeing the detective plot, this was sorely needed, man, and it made my heart sing to see this this version of Batman on the big screen, Chris.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of ways we talk about this with Spider-Man films as well, where they go, "Oh, he's an Avenger. Oh, he's fighting aliens and stuff like that." We're like, yeah, but at his core, he's a street level hero. He's helping out the everyday people in New York City, and when we finally got some returns to that, that was very made us very, very happy. And what was the influence of this movie in particular, the Batman? I kept hearing, coming out of the film, like, oh my God, this is Year One. Oh my God, this is The Long Halloween. And so the influence of this movie was this Marvel fanboy went straight to DC Universe Infinite and started reading both of those books. And this is text. It's right there. It's absolutely right there. Down to particularly in the Year One by Frank Miller, you see like the kind of cursive manuscript, like in a notebook, and you see Bruce in this film writing like that. So that kind of jumped out to me. But yeah, this also felt like a straight like 3 or 4 parter, okay, maybe 10 parter in Batman the Animated Series. Like, one of our first exposures to the character, and really kind of in that Mask of the Phantasm type, detective story, and it absolutely was perfect, on the nose when it came to those elements for me.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I know that you're the Marvel fanboy and you've not read a lot of these things. I remember very very vividly the first time I read Batman Year One, a great piece of work from before Frank Miller lost his mind. It's like what happens to comic book writers when they get older? I'm not really sure. But yeah, you're exactly right. That sort of cursive script from Year One, the detective elements from Long Halloween, that sort of voiceover element, the relationship between Batman and James Gordon, which we'll talk more about in a bit. It just hits so many right notes. As a comic book fan, I find it difficult to believe that a comic book fan would not enjoy this, considering how closely it takes influence from some of the very best Batman stories. All right, Kris, your first point. I don't know if I'm ready to talk about that. I'm already breaking out in sweats here.
She's the star of the show. She's everything. Yeah, Zoe Kravitz as Selena Kyle was incredible. And like I said in our news story, maybe it was for the best that she was not attached to Dark Knight Rises in any form or fashion, so she could have 100% of the shine here. It's so incredible. I loved everything about the character. I loved everything about like her choices acting wise. The chemistry between her and Pattinson was magnificent. I even loved like the the idea that she's the son of Carmine Falcone, like that Falcone, who knows? Like I thought that was genius, and like this whole revenge tour thing for her mother, I thought that was incredible, and it really gave like some really interesting backstory to the character. Um, I loved her fighting style. I love that she rescued him. Like there was so much to love about this character, and if we don't get like a solo series or film, I'm gonna riot.
Yeah, it's probably by far my favorite Catwoman interpretation. There've been some good ones, remarkable ones in their own right over the years. We can argue about how comic book accurate they were here and there, but the Catwoman of the comic books is incredibly complex in a lot of ways. I mean, she is not necessarily a villain, but not necessarily a hero. Somebody who's willing to walk on the other side of the law, and does come into conflict with Batman because of that frequently. But at the same time, there's a undeniable attraction and relationship there between the two, and they do care for each other, which is a great level of complexity in that relationship. And I think Zoe's version of Selena Kyle comes the closest to what we've seen in the comic books. It's really, really pitch perfect in so many ways. Those moments when her and Batman are just kind of staring in each other's eyes, and you just don't know, are they going to go in for a kiss, or are they going to try to beat the crap out of each other? Like what's coming next? You never quite know. So this interpretation of Catwoman was just really, really, really good. Easily the best in my book that we have seen in live action. I will also say, since we're talking about influences, that's, if I remember correctly, straight from Jeff Lopes and Tim Sale's Dark Victory. At the end of that 13-issue maxi series, they reveal that Selena Kyle believes that she is the daughter of Carmine Falcone, and that she was coming, after him to try to dismantle his empire, basically. So that, once again, Matt Reeves the Batman is wearing its influences on its sleeve, but they're excellent influences.
Yeah. I will say that as far as comics go, I'm not very well versed in Selena Kyle, but her Marvel counterpart, if you will, Felicia Hardy, is one of my favorite characters in all of the Marvel universe. So I see a lot of parallels there, between the two characters, and it's everything I love about Felicia.
I would also say that if you're not very well versed in Catwoman, I definitely can throw some nerd commendations your way. There are some quintessential Catwoman runs, and there are some stories that she plays a significant role in the Batman comics as well that are really, really, really good. So yeah, it's just a very, very interesting character, and I would say in a lot of ways she's harder edged than Black Cat Felicia Hardy. I always felt like that flirtatious banter that she has with Spidey is a little more on the humorous end, whereas I think in a lot of interpretations in the comic books, Selena has a much harder edge. It sometimes seems like she's had it a lot tougher,
Yeah.
and is harder edged because of that. And so there is a flirtatious banter with Batman, but there always is like a much more dangerous undercurrent, I think, to those interactions than what you would see in the Spidey comics. I think you would find yourself a big Catwoman fan after reading some of her more quintessential stories. I really believe that.
I definitely am interested. I will totally agree with what you said. Felicia is very still, even though she's had hardships, she's still very fun loving and very kind of, very, like, very silly and still very humorous, like you said. So I can definitely, even with little experience on the other side of that comparison, I can definitely see that straight away.
If you're not going to read anything else, I'm not sure if this is necessarily on DC Universe Unlimited. I haven't checked, but if you're going to read anything Catwoman, I would really, really recommend Darwin Cook's Selena's Big Score, Catwoman When in Rome, which is another Jeff Loeb joint from before he lost his marbles, and Ed Brubaker actually had a run on the character that is absolutely fantastic. And if you even just look at the cover of Volume 1, you can definitely see this very, very strong influence of the Brubaker run on Zoë Kravitz's interpretation of the character. So those would be like my three starting points. I would definitely do like Darwin Cook's Selena's Big Score, Catwoman When in Rome, and probably Brubaker's run. For sure. I think you'll enjoy those, man.
My friend Caleb right now is grinning from ear to ear, and he will be when he hears this. Selena Kyle is his all-time favorite character in comics, so I'll have to tell him I've got a lot of homework.
Yeah, and trust me, that's tip of the iceberg. I mean, there's also great Batman stories where she's an incredibly significant character that I think you'd enjoy. I can put together a list if you'd like.
Yes. All right, Dave, your next is what I there's so much great about this movie, and this is right at the top.
Again, we never really get to see on the big screen how tight Gordon and Batman are. I remember there was a Batman the Animated Series tie-in issue that is essentially like a New Year's Eve sort of thing or something, and you see that there's like this tradition that Batman and Gordon specifically meet in this one little cafe or something where nobody asks questions, and they sit there and they share a cup of coffee, basically. And just like that level of, we don't know each other, but we do know each other, like we're friends, we're allies, but we're not just colleagues. Like there's a friendship there and a trust that you don't easily get in other relationships in Gotham because everybody's out for themselves. And so seeing in the Batman, this central relationship And I really believe the central relationship in a lot of ways of this movie is Gordon and Batman. Gordon sticking his neck out for Batman, bringing him into crime scenes, helping him escape when the other cops are trying to come after him. Batman always trying to help Gordon out. There's a strong central relationship there that we've never actually seen on the big screen. And I'm not saying anything about castings of other Jim Gordons. There've been several good ones, but there is something about Jeffrey Wright's interpretation of the character. There's something about how he interacts with Batman. Like, that something happened. Like there is a history there. Something happened between those two, and they just decided we're going to trust each other. And at one point or early on in the movie, Gordon says, Batman says something like, "Don't you trust me?" And he says, "I don't even know who you are." But in the same token, 30 minutes later, he's like, "I don't trust these guys. I don't trust anybody but you." Like there's this implicit trust between the two, and I just this relationship is what we see in the comic books. This very strong bond between Gordon and Batman, where even though Gordon doesn't know who Batman is, he trusts him, he believes in him. They have each other's back, even when things go absolutely sideways. And we've never seen that on the big screen, and it just excited me so much to see that.
Yeah, either we get like a goofy cartoony thing like during the Schumacher films, or they barely meet, they barely have a relationship in the Nolan films. So yeah, seeing this, or it's this full-fledged like partnership. It's almost like they're partners. Yeah, so that was really really cool to see. And yeah, it's just really fascinating and I love the portrayal by both actors. And like you said, they just stick their neck out for each other, and it's this back and forth, and it's almost like they are partners, and it's just really crazy cool, the dynamic that they have with each other.
And I'm just going to say this, man. I am so glad when casting agents are colorblind. Like, I am glad, because Jeffrey Wright in this role is a revelation. He's the quintessential James Gordon. And so if we would have had like Zoe Kravitz situation in like the Nolan verse, where we're not going urban with the character, like, what a stupid comment. Like we could have missed out on something like Jeffrey Wright as Jim Gordon, and I think that would be an absolute travesty, because like that's the most James Gordon I think that we have seen on the big screen. All right, Kris, that brings us to your second like, and this one I will wholeheartedly echo.
Oh man, everything about the music, like, uh, I think I saw something like on Spotify that the "Something in the Way" song by Nirvana has had like a 2,000% increase in plays. And then the score by Michael Giacchino, like, which is just immaculate. Just that main theme, like every time I walk into a room, that song is playing, and I walk slowly, make sure my footsteps are elaborate. It's just infectious, and it does so much to set the mood for a scene. The combination of the sounds of the rain and his bootsteps, and then that main theme, that score, and then the Nirvana song. It's just everything about the music in this movie absolutely is one of the quintessential parts of setting the mood and setting the theme for the entire film. And without it, I don't know. I think it's the glue that holds it all together, to be honest.
Yeah, the score in particular. I mean, the inclusion of the Nirvana song was fun and all, but the score in particular to me is so moody and so gives that noir vibe, and at the same
And
time,
shouts to Ave Maria as well. Always a winner.
oh God, yes, sung at my uncle's wedding too. So it keeps popping up in my
super
life.
Catholic.
Yeah, just a little bit. But the thing here too, I think, is just that the score really, really, really hits the right notes. Not just because it has that noir sort of vibe, but also because it has such a clear Batman theme. Like, one of the things that the Nolan movies are always criticized for is that there isn't a clear theme for Batman's character. There isn't a theme that's like, oh, now Batman's coming. There's no Superman theme like in Superman 78 or something, right? Like we're lacking a clear musical theme for the character, and that is there is one here. I mean, it is so apparent. It slaps you in the face, and it's so moody and cool and different from what we've had before for like superhero scores. Like this is a great little Batman theme. Like that, that those tones start droning. Like, oh, there he comes, his own. Like
Yeah.
it's perfect. It is such a good Batman theme, man. It's probably the best that we've gotten since Danny Elfman's on Batman '89.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Dave, your third and final like is a big one.
Yeah, dude. Like, who would have thought the Penguin would be this darn good? Like even buried under all this makeup and stuff. Colin Farrell came out of nowhere with this. Like, I did not expect this performance to be this good. Now, seeing a more mob inspired Penguin is not that unusual in the comic books. It's kind of become sort of a standard thing to see him more as a crime lord and less as a guy who shoots out of umbrellas and throws exploding penguins at you or something, which I think works incredibly well for the character. And it's so fascinating to see how they made a penguin that was the penguin without looking like a penguin. I know that sounds weird, but we didn't have to go the Danny DeVito route here and have him be raised in the sewer by runaway penguins, and like eating raw fish and like looking like a bizarre I don't even know. Like, we didn't have to go in this direction at all. And at the same time, we have sort of exaggerated features and that very prominent facial scar. He almost reminds me of like a Dick Tracy villain. Like Dick Tracy villains in the comics always had these really exaggerated facial features. They were like almost forerunners to sort of like the supervillain rogues galleries we have these days. And like, I think the Penguin is right there. Like, he's not full on, look, I'm a supervillain and I shoot, a machine gun out of my umbrella. But at the same time, he is sort of a crime mob villain, and the performance here is absolutely great. Like, this guy is complex and interesting and apparently speaks really good Spanish. And so I'm excited actually that they've decided to make a spin-off that focuses on the Penguin. Like, I'm interested to see more of this character and how he interacts with Gotham sort of at large and stuff. Like, I think there's really something in that performance and in this interpretation of the character that I'm willing to stick with and see more of, Chris.
Yeah, and I love too that it's not like so carbon copy. I think with a lot of organized crime storylines in popular media, it can become so black and white, like, oh, this is the guy. But it was very intertwined. It was very like complicated, the storyline and the betrayals and the back and forth, and that added to so much more of the context of the character as well.
And can we just admit that in the Nolan movies, all the mob scenes were by far the most boring of the
Hmm.
movie? Like, every time the mob characters came on screen, I was like, no, no, no. Can we go back to Heath Ledger's
Yeah.
Joker? This is boring. But here, all the mob stuff worked. Like the Penguin, Carmine Falcone, all these characters were complex and interesting and three dimensional, fully realized. Whereas all the mob characters in the Nolan trilogy, and I'm not trying to compare the two, I mean, to some extent, but I'm not saying that the Nolan movies are necessarily horrible or something. I really did enjoy that version of Batman a lot too. But the mob stuff was very flat. All the mob characters were very one dimensional, and because of that, you never really got invested in them. Like, I was invested in Carmine Falcone. I was invested in Oswald Cobblepot. I found these characters very, very interesting, and I wanted to see what happens to them.
I'll add to that John Turturro's portrayal of Carmine Falcone, because like it was this like very suave, creepy, handsy type thing, but like you bought it, and like you could see how he rose to the top of this criminal element because he's so charismatic and everything.
Yeah, and I really, really loved like how soft spoken he was in most of the
Yes.
scenes. Like, to the point where, like, if you didn't know who he was when he walked into the room, you almost could like overlook him. Like, he's very, very subtle
Yeah.
in how he uses his voice and his movements, but at the same time he projects like threatening and scary. It was a very, very cool performance for a character like that.
And I think, not to do a direct comparison all the time, but with Tom Wilkinson as Falcone, like why do you have a white English actor playing an Italian mobster? But that's neither here nor there. But it was very cartoonish, I feel, and very like silly. Like it's a very silly caricature of what a mobster was, and these felt like, oh god, this is the real deal.
Yes, that's exactly right, man. All right, Kris, that brings us to your final like.
Okay, so like ever since Pattinson was cast, and we saw the first looks of any kind of footage or any kind of set photos, the running joke is emo Bruce, and even now, even after the release, there's still jokes about it, and it's all in good fun. But I thought that it was absolutely fascinating and it absolutely relatable. You know, we always see Bruce Wayne typically is this square jawed, handsome man that is this archetypal machismo type of character. But like when you really sit and think about like the effects of both of his parents being murdered like that, this makes so much sense of the type of recluse, social recluse and hermit that you would really be. And so I thought this was like a much more realistic and believable type of character. And I'm really interested to kind of see where we go with this character moving forward. I think that's probably what I'm most intrigued about is seeing the development of Bruce, because most of the time in other Batman films, this is an interesting comparison too. We got a lot of Batman. We did not get a lot of Bruce. Most of the film, he was in suit, Batmaning. Um, and so I think that left us wanting for more as well. But for the first time ever, I really gave a crap about Bruce. Any other type of Batman, I didn't give a rip about Bruce himself. I wanted Batman. This one, I need to know more about his development, and like it was so interesting, and I thought it was so relatable and so believable, because when you're dealing with grief like that, if you've ever had anything terrible and traumatic happen to you, that's a very relatable thing.
So here's the thing about, I think, where this movie departs in a lot of ways from previous Batman movies. I think in a lot of ways most Batman movies are not actually about Batman. I think most Batman movies that we've had in the past were predominantly about the villains. And I think that started very clearly with Tim Burton's Batman, because the bigger star in that movie was by far Jack Nicholson.
Yes.
And so the movie was very much focused on Jack Nicholson and on his version of the Joker. And we got a lot less Bruce Wayne and a lot less Batman as development out of that. I mean, if you look at that movie, as much as I love it, what was Batman's arc in that movie?
Not a
You
lot.
know, like I can't. Yeah, I mean, I can't point to a very clear arc for him in that movie. Very similar in Batman Returns. That was very much the Penguin and Selina Kyle and Max Schreck's movie, even before it was Batman's movie. So Batman has, in a lot of ways, always sort of played second fiddle to his villains in movies. And I think this is really, in a lot of ways, the first movie that is predominantly about Batman. And so we get actually a very clear arc for him for a change. He starts with I am vengeance, and by the end of the movie realizes that vengeance isn't what Gotham needs, that he needs to be more, he needs to be better. It can't just be about vengeance. And that arc and how he gets there and how he sees how the Riddler was inspired by him, and how one of Riddler's minions there at the end says, "I am vengeance," and the face he makes, the eyes, how that pang hits him, like, holy crap, this is me. This is what I could be because I'm so focused on vengeance. That is fascinating. It's a great, great arc. It's actual Batman character development. He is in a different place at the end than he is at the beginning. And how many Batman movies can we say that about? But not just that. I think, I think there's so much weird discourse going on around, the casting of Robert Pattinson, for example, and how they're making fun of the fact that he was in the Twilight movies, kind of completely ignoring all the, the small independent films that he has done since, kind of cutting his teeth and honing his craft. He's quite the actor these days. And then on top of that, like stuff like, oh, he has the dark makeup around his eyes when he takes the mask off. He's a little goth boy or something. But dude, every Batman that we've had has the black makeup around his eyes, as a way of making it work with the mask. This is just a Batman that is, dirty and grimy. He takes off the mask, he's sweaty. The black makeup is run across his face. You don't think that would happen with the other Batman? Of course it did. We just never saw it. I joke that you could almost smell him, through the
Yes,
screen.
yes.
Like that man was sweaty and grimy and was
My
just.
favorite line from Alfred: "Go take a shower."
And it is absolutely accurate, because if you're in that suit all night fighting people and running around and grappling hooking around, of course you're going to be dirty, sweaty, and grimy. Crime fighting is not going to be a clean job, especially not in Gotham City. And I think it was a wise move to show that kind of stuff. This is the kind of thing that grounds Batman, not trying to explain where every single gadget came from. I didn't need, like in the Nolan movies, for example, an elaborate backstory about, how these contact lenses were developed that he uses. That's not what makes a character grounded. Showing these sorts of things, the sweat, the grime, the black eye makeup running, that shows a grounded take on the character. And so I absolutely adore, this version of Batman, and to an extent this version of Bruce Wayne. I think it's interesting because I don't think we saw a Bruce Wayne necessarily in this movie, because he was basically Batman even when he didn't have the mask off. He did not try to make a difference between Batman and Bruce Wayne, to the point where I think the Riddler got it right when he said, I know when you wear the mask, that's your true face. When I put my mask on, I felt like I could be who I really am. I think that's true in this case. He's not given himself a chance to be Bruce Wayne because he's been so focused, again, on vengeance. And I think if we get a sequel, we're going to probably see a very different kind of Bruce Wayne come out of this. I'm very interested to see where this goes, Chris.
Yeah, and I just had an aha moment when you laid it out like that. My all-time favorite piece of literature, piece of anything. I usually don't revisit things. I've read the entirety of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas at least 8 times in full. I absolutely love that story, and he goes through this entire elaborate plan that is literally decades and decades of planning, meticulous planning, learning the weaknesses of the people who wronged him, and this plan of vengeance, only to find out that it was all the wrong way to go about it. And like he's his whole life and all of his wealth and all of his relationships have been consumed with this path of vengeance, this war path, and then realizing in the end that it was all for naught. Like it was he, the one thing he cared about, Mercedes, like he jeopardized all of that because of vengeance. And so there are very clear parallels here, and it actually just dawned on me.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that is a very powerful theme, that vengeance, that revenge does not give the closure that you think, and that you have to move past that. And I think this movie does a really good point, a really good job making that point through the Bruce Wayne Batman character.
Also made, since this is kind of analogous, like the whole Thomas and Martha Wayne thing was very fascinating, and like making them more believable characters rather than these staunchy cardboard memoriams that they have been in basically every other iteration I've seen.
Yeah, so that I think, if I remember correctly, feels a little bit like something like Batman Earth One, the Earth One graphic novels. There was a little bit more a willingness to admit that the Waynes might have been imperfect. And then there's like the Telltale Batman games, which also play with the idea that maybe they weren't exactly good guys. So again, there's some very, very clear and strong influences here. I really think that this Alfred too is straight up. Is straight up Earth One,
Let me ask you this: the Arkham last name for Martha is her maiden name. Is that a new thing, or is that long established?
So if I remember correctly, initially it was Martha Kane,
Hmm.
and it's like that part of the family that Bruce is related to Kate Kane, Batwoman, through
Oh, okay.
in mainstream comics. Now, I want to say, you're questioning me on my DC knowledge. I want to say that that's a Batman Earth One thing as well, because by the time you hit the third out of those three graphic novels, that comes big into play. Like, um, that this idea that the Arkhams all have mental health problems and stuff. That I want to say that's a Jeff Johns Batman Earth One thing. I don't recall seeing that before then. But it does have a precedent in the comic books.
All right, Dave, maybe we should like retitle this like the nitpicks or something, but technically they're dislikes. What is your first dislike?
So my first dislike is very simply that I think the finale worked better on an emotional level than on an action level. I think it was a fine enough action sequence when he's trying to take down all the Riddler's followers, I guess, in a social media sense and in a literal sense. Um, but at the same time, like I think there was an emotional resonance to Catwoman coming to save him, and then him saving Catwoman. And there was an emotional resonance to like flooding Gotham and him realizing that he needs to be not vengeance but really hope for people. I think all that worked pitch perfect. I do think though that the action sequence itself wasn't perfectly laid out. I think there could have been more done to make that an interesting action sequence. I feel like he got shot with a shotgun an awful lot,
Yeah.
and was dangling from the side of a building repeatedly. And every time it treated it like it was the first time he was dangling from the side of the building, and this time for sure he's gonna die. And like he's already dangled from the side of this thing twice before. Why is it more scary this time? So I think the finale was very good on an emotional level, but I don't think that the sequence itself was necessarily laid out action wise as good as it could have been. I think there were action sequences before in the movie that felt much more interesting than the finale one, and I think
The
that's just
chase.
something that. Yeah, I think they should have done a little more to make the finale feel like the biggest moment action wise, as well as the biggest moment from an emotional level.
Yeah, although I did love him taking on the incel army. It did not it did not pack enough punch, pun fully intended, but yeah, I can see that.
So I'm going to be completely honest with you. Your first dislike is my second dislike. So let's just go ahead and talk about it.
Let's do it. I loved Alfred, but there just wasn't near enough. And I thought that like in a movie that's 2 hours and 55 minutes, it's hard to say you need more of something. But I feel like there was a little bit lacking as far as like the relationship there, because I ate it up right away where like he's helping him by like cracking that codex and everything, and then boom, he gets blown up, and then they have the scene in the hospital which is incredibly emotional, and then we don't really get him again. So I needed more Alfred, and I love how somebody said this on social media, we haven't had a bad Alfred yet. My favorite thing about the Snyder films was Jeremy Irons. Like, so if I have to pick out one thing, I actually say something nice about the Snyder films. I love Jeremy Irons as Alfred. But so I was like, how is this going to work with Andy Serkis? I mean, like, really, we're going to have Gollum, we're going to have Caesar from the Planet of the Apes films, and Ulysses Claw. But I absolutely loved it, and I needed more of it.
Yeah, and this Alfred again, kind of wearing its influences on the sleeves, basically felt very much like Earth One's Alfred, right down to the fact that he had like the goatee thing going on and everything, the look, and the feel, and even how he talks about how he helped train Bruce to fight because of his time in like special ops or something. That's very Earth One. Very very cool version of Alfred, and very different than the usual butler thing that they have going on. So yeah, I totally agree. I think this is a really interesting Alfred, and we did not get enough of him. And if they're going to do anything in the sequel, they should definitely have more of him and involve him more strongly in the narrative, because it was well acted, well written, and just a really interesting take on the character.
And I will say, it gave me vibes of Sean Pertwee's performance on Gotham, which was basically the only thing I liked about Gotham. That
Yeah.
show was just a whole mess, but Sean Pertwee who's a great character actor that I love everything I've seen him in. He showed up in one of my favorite shows, another Dumas reference. Here we go. But he showed up in the Musketeers, the BBC version. He was magnificent there, so I loved that character. So I was happy to see that again, and like I said, just need more of it.
I totally agreed. Now we just did your first dislike and my second dislike at the same time, so that was fun. What is your second dislike of the movie, Chris?
Like I said, this is more like nitpicks for me, but we saw this in The Dark Knight of the villain giving themselves up, so it was just like, okay, here we go again. But I did like how they kind of did more with it, of like his real plan was unleashing his incel army. But it was just like, I'm not a fan of this whole villain giving themselves up trope.
But really, it's all part of the plan. Yeah, I'll totally agree with that. That's become one of the tropiest tropes that superheroes ever troped. Um, I don't think it adds anything to it to say it was part of the plan. I think it would have been much more interesting to say that they legitimately caught him,
Yeah.
that the Riddler didn't plan for this, that he had planned to lead his incel army, basically. I love how you call it the incel army.
That's our new thing.
It makes me smile. It makes me smile.
It might be the
I think
title
this
for the
episode
episode.
is Batman versus the incel army. Yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, I don't think it adds anything to that in this case. I think if we said it was his plan to actually lead them himself, but then when he didn't show, they decided to just go through with the plan anyways, I think that would have been better, would have given, I think, the heroes a win, basically, without it being like, oh, the master plan of the bad guy.
Also, somebody pointed this out on social media. The Riddler only has 500 followers. How is he this master planner, and like how is that like 500 followers?
He's
Good gracious.
Well, dude, he's definitely not an influencer. You
Yeah.
can say that.
All right, Dave, what is your final dislike?
So my final dislike is basically, and it seems like a weird thing to say, but I'm sad that it's going to be a long time till we see more of this Batman. And you mentioned sort of at the top that it felt like sort of a multi-part episode on something like Batman the Animated Series or something. And I think, and this is so disingenuous of me because I love big screen movies, and I've kind of criticized that Disney's thrown everything MCU lately on Disney Plus as series. But man, this is a small screen take on Batman. I sincerely believe that. I think this is something that doesn't necessarily benefit from being huge on the big screen. It's not a bombastic movie in a lot of ways, and I don't think based on the staging and setting and the special effects of everything, I don't think this was a huge CGI production, Like, I think you can have this kind of Batman easily in like a series on HBO Max on the small screen, and it'll work perfectly. And my biggest regret about this movie is that it's going to be now again at least 2 to 3 years till we see this Batman again. And it would be so fun to have like a mini series, 6 to 8 episodes every year where we get another like long Halloween, Dark Victory style, story of him investigating something. You and I both know the way Hollywood functions, that at the most we're going to get this version of Batman directed by Matt Reeves at most 2 more times. Like trilogy seems to be 3 and done, seems to be the most that anybody's willing to do these days. And that's fair. They want to move on and do other things. But this version of Batman seems so definite to me as far as like how it connects to the comic book and stuff. I just wished instead of getting something like, Gotham, we would get something like this on the small screen. You can do, I think, this kind of Batman very easily with the right kind of writers on board on the small screen. And we could have had a lot more of this kind of Batman. I'm just sad that it's going to be probably at least 3 years till we see it again.
Yeah, and even we referenced it before, but it looks like we're going to get delays for the Penguin series, and the GCPD series that was announced a while back is on hold. So, yeah, it's a little bit saddening.
It is, because it's just such a good version of Batman, I think. All right, that brings us to your final dislike, Chris. What you got?
And like I said, this is more of a nitpick, but like the whole DA scene with the bomb attached to his neck, he's like sitting there refusing to give up the name. And if I remember correctly, he has to give him the password, but he's still like standing like face to face, forehead to forehead with him. So even if he were to give up the name, they still would have had to type in the password, and then he takes a bomb to the face. And like just the way that that played out towards the end, I was like, dude, he's obviously not going to give this name up. Back away.
Yeah, I think it would have been a little more believable if he would have, like, jumped behind a pew or
Yeah.
something, right before it goes off. It was a very cool visual on the one hand, but he also got, like, as you said, bomb to the face, which is literally the one part of his body that's not completely covered up.
Yeah.
So it's a little more unbelievable that his armor would have completely protected him there. But you're right, it is kind of a nitpicky moment, and not unusual for sort of these comic booky movies, I guess. But we can't forgive all transgressions.
Maybe the Riddler's bomb making skills are not as quality as you thought, because Alfred had the presence of mind to throw it on the other side of the room, and he came out okay. So maybe the bombs aren't that strong.
Yeah, they're little tiny bombs.
Yeah, they're attention getting bombs. He just wants a radical change. He doesn't want to blow up everything.
Yeah. That's right.
All right, that wraps up our review of The Batman. Dave, all right, time to grade the assignment. What do you give it?
I'm going to give it some high praise, dude. I'm thinking we got an A- here. I think this is just easily the best Batman movie that we've had. I have other Batman movies that are very close to my heart. Batman 89 obviously is very close to my heart. It's the first Batman movie I've ever watched, and I love it in a lot of ways. And I absolutely adore The Dark Knight for Heath Ledger's bonkers take on the Joker. But if you're looking at like whole package, I think this is the movie that gets the most right. And I love this movie, and I can't wait to see it again. So A- for me, Chris. How about you?
I'm going to be a little bit more generous, but that stays in line with our grading practices. I think I'm a big bleeding heart, but I'm gonna go probably A, and I can't wait to watch it again. I think we're gonna get it released next month on HBO Max, so I'm just gonna have it on loop throughout the house.
That sounds like a plan, man. Just like every screen you have, just constantly playing the Batman 24 hours
every
a day.
time I walk into a room, something is in the way. All right, that is all for our Byword Big Talk this week. Make sure you hit us up on social media with your thoughts, your likes, your dislikes, at Nerd Byword on Twitter and Instagram, or That Nerd Dave, That Nerd Chris individually. But when we come back from this, we're going to come at you with 2 more nerd commendations. All right, we're back for everybody's favorite segment. You know it as Nerd Commendations. All right, Dave, we already referenced a Year One, but you got a different character in mind.
Yeah, so I think it's one of those things that just happens when you suddenly have access to DC Universe Infinite. You find yourself reading a whole bunch of stuff that you've never had a chance to read before. And one of the things I decided to sink my teeth into was a 2008 miniseries, 6-issue miniseries called Huntress Year One. Now, for the uninitiated, the Huntress is a Batman side character, one of the extended Bat family, as we like to say. She is actually sort of a mob princess, Helena Bertinelli, whose family gets gunned down by a rival family, and she transforms herself into the Huntress as a way of getting revenge. She's in a lot of ways sort of a darker reflection of Batman. She uses crossbows. She is not above lethal force, which gets her into, a lot of trouble with Batman frequently as they, argue about methods. She's been often sort of the character that is on the outside of the Bat family, an ally, but not really a part of it, like a Robin or a Batgirl, for example. And that makes her, as strange as that is to say, a harder-edged character than many of those in the Bat family. And so seeing a Year One take on her was really interesting to me. This Bat side character, Huntress, is fascinating already out of the gate. But then seeing a really good team take her on and sort of flesh out her background was a lot of fun. So it was written by Ivory Sophia Madison, had Cliff Richards and Matt Clark on pencils, colors by Jason Wright. No, yeah, colors by Cliff Richards and the cover color by Jason Wright. Very, very beautiful series from a visual perspective. And from a writing perspective, it has, once again, a little bit of that film noir quality as she sort of is narrating her life as she gets, moved around to different family to be raised. And one of the family members is sort of a mob assassin who decides to train her so she can protect herself, and the complexities of the closest thing you have to a big brother or father figure being this assassin. And then, just the twist and turns through all that. Another really cool thing is, despite the fact that she is not above using lethal force, the Huntress is extremely Catholic. So she wears a cross as part of her outfit, and sort of her relationship with her faith is sort of a very interesting element of the character. I was very, very pleased with Huntress Year One. I thought it was a great, great retelling of her origin story. And I was very, very pleased also to see that they weren't using the absolutely atrocious Jim Lee redesign of her basically having her belly hanging out and everything, because apparently less clothes is better for some reason in comic books. The take of her suit here is very much in line with probably the best Huntress suit we've seen. And I was glad to see that make a comeback. Just overall, the 6-issue mini was a great primer on who Huntress is, what her relationship is with Batman, how she figures into sort of the mob landscape of Gotham City. Just a really, really fun take on the character. Well, fun in the way is it's a fun read, but not really fun to be Helena Bertinelli considering all the horrible things that happened to her. But yeah, this one comes highly recommended, man. It's a very good read.
Yeah, I was absolutely captivated by the character when I saw Birds of Prey film, which is like the little comic book movie that could. Like, there's so much gold in that film, like, and it doesn't get nearly enough fanfare for me. Of course, we love Journey Smollett's Black Canary and everything, but I thought Mary Elizabeth Winstead was super fun as this like woman of few words. Thought it was a hilarious take, so I'm definitely interested to look out more for this character.
Yeah, Huntress is one of those characters that I think gets sort of underappreciated. Fun fact, when Huntress was first introduced, right in line with our The Batman review, she was actually introduced as an Earth 2 character where all the superheroes got a chance to sort of age and grow up. And she was the daughter of Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle. And then after DC got sort of rid of its multiverse for a little while, they reinvented the character as this mob princess, and I think that's probably the more popular version of the character at this point. So, but she started out as Batman's daughter, essentially. All right, Chris, what is your nerd commendation this week?
Oh man, it should be Xbox Game Pass Ultimate, but as oh, but
Every
I
week,
probably
right?
right. But anyways, one of the games that was just released on there this week is one of the most critically acclaimed, well-reviewed games of the year, and that is Marvel's Guardian of the Galaxy. And so, with kind of the ups and downs of the Avengers game, it is a previous nerd commendation, but I can see the valid criticisms of it, and I can see why it flopped with a lot of people. I enjoyed it. It's not the best game, but I enjoyed it. So I was a little bit gun shy when it came to Guardians of the Galaxy. But after having heard all these reviews, and it's no additional cost for me to download it, man, it's so good. If you love like Telltale games and stuff like that, which they did previously have a Guardians of the Galaxy Telltale game, it's very along the lines story wise of that. Um, one of the criticisms is that you only play as Star Lord and that you kind of have these co op skills that you build with the other Guardians. It's the same cast from the film franchise, with basically more or less some of the same characterizations. I think this might be a hot take. I actually think I am. Uh, I think I like these better here. I think I prefer them. Um, to some of the characterizations of the characters. They have a little bit more personality and flair. Um, but I really love this game. It's really fun, kind of building relationships with the other guardians. It's complicated, and as with any kind of Telltale like choices type of game, they have consequences. And I absolutely love having stakes in something and a decision that you make. in a video game has, consequences and repercussions. So particularly, I think Star-Lord is an interesting character that kind of has lost his way in the MCU for me. But in reading Al Ewing's um, Guardians of the Galaxy in particular, issue 9 of that run is probably the greatest comic single issue that I read in the last year. I highly recommend it. I did nerd commend it as part of my entire Al Ewing run, but Guardians of the Galaxy in particular, here's a hot take. I liked it better than Immortal Hulk. So his Guardians run is just fun. It's effervescent, it's bright, it's colorful, it's so much fun, and it's in a lot of ways this game reflects that. It's what I want from Star Wars. Like, even there's even little notes. There's a little Chewbacca action figure that figures heavily in the storyline. But it's just like that fun-loving Han Solo type. Like, we're on the run from the Nova Corps. We're trying to dodge all these different people trying to collect bounties on us. It's so much fun, and now it's got me like dying to read more Guardians of the Galaxy comics. The storytelling on this is immaculate. There's some really deep emotional moments between Star-Lord and his mother, like that will have you in tears. Really complicated back and forth with some of the Guardians. They make decisions they don't agree with. They get pissed off at each other. Really fascinating stuff. And it's just so freaking funny. Like, the writing on this is top notch. It will have you howling with laughter. And my favorite feature of the game is when you get enough like team up points, you click the left bumper and the right bumper at the same time, and you do this huddle up. And then like you have to like figure out the right motivational speech to give to the team. And if you do it correctly, the soundtrack starts playing, and it's all the great hits from the 80s. So Dave, I was mashing on a bunch of aliens. I was slaughtering aliens to Rick Astley's Never Gonna Give You Up, or Wham's Wake Me Up Before You Go Go. And like, it's just, it doesn't get much better than that. So if you're an 80s kid, especially, I was born late 80s, so some of the references are a little bit older than me, but I have enough through my parents' influence to appreciate it. So 80s nostalgia, fun-loving quips, like this game has it all.
I'm going to say I was a huge fan of Telltale as a company. I loved their sort of story-driven games.
Yes.
But the Guardians of the Galaxy game they put out was the one game I really struggled to get into, and I ultimately gave up on it. And I think that's because it tried maybe a little too much to hew sort of the MCU version of the characters without actually having the license to use the likenesses.
Yes.
And so the whole thing ended up feeling like sort of, great value Guardians of the Galaxy, like some kind of off-brand rather than its own valid interpretation. And so I'm thrilled to hear that this is not the case here. I know this game has been on my radar, for a while because it's gotten such good word of mouth already. It saddens me that Square Enix has kind of gone on the record as saying that they found the game to be disappointing, even though critics almost universally loved it. I don't know what's going on at Square Enix that they can't get their crap straight. I'm just really excited to play this thing. I've been waiting for it to come to Game Pass. Now that it's there, I'm going to try to make time for it. I love a good game like in sort of this genre, so I'm here for it, man.
Yeah, also a really cool note is like there's lots of different outfits for each character, and then when you go to that screen, it gives you a brief rundown of each outfit. And here's the cool part for lovers of comic books. It shows you the first appearance of that outfit, who designed it, who was the writer on that comic, who is the artist, the penciler, the inker, everybody. The whole creative team gets love. And as a comic book fan, that made my heart sing.
Yeah, I totally am with you there, man.
All right, that wraps up another episode of the Nerd Byword podcast. Thank you so much for riding along with us. What are your thoughts on the Batman? Be sure to hit us up on social media at Nerd Byword on Twitter and Instagram, or That Nerd Dave and That Nerd Kris on social media.
And if you liked what you heard, don't forget to give us a rating, a review, and subscribe to our podcast, The Nerd Byword, on any podcasting platform. We're available truly everywhere. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn Radio. If you're there, we're there. You can even find us on our very own website, nerdbyword.com.
And as always, stay well and stay nerdy.
The Nerd Byword is written and produced by Kris and Dave, two nerds with a love of all things pop culture. The podcast features music by Al Jimenez with additional drops composed by Joe Biondi. Our show art is by Ashery Design. Find us at nerdbyword.com and wherever podcasts are available.